Please won't you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts together find their way into the heart of God this morning. Amen. Why, anybody can have a brain, the Wizard of Oz says to the Scarecrow. That's a very mediocre commodity. Every pusillanimous creature that crawls on the earth or slinks through slimy seas has a brain. Back where I come from, we have universities, seats of great learning where men go to become great thinkers. And when they come out, they think deep thoughts and with no more brains than you have. But they have one thing you haven't got, a diploma. Do you remember this part of The Wizard of Oz? I just watched it the other day with Isaac. He had never seen it. Can you believe that? Not the best parent, clearly. You read the book, that's true. That just made me look like an even better parent. I read the book, I didn't see the movie. Jesus didn't have a diploma or a fancy job or any kind of status at all. His only credential was his capacity to bear the suffering of others. Now, I asked my 8-year-old son, Isaac, if I could tell you this before I did, and he gave me permission. But he's been struggling in school for a while now. He's a brilliant and articulate and kind and funny young man. Matt Potenza is nodding his head in agreement. He knows him very well as his soccer coach. But he doesn't always understand what the teacher is trying to teach. The pandemic interruption didn't help this situation in the least, right, parents? During that time, we took him out of school altogether, and he spent that time as the butler of our house, serving me breakfast in bed every morning and wearing a three-piece suit while he did it. Yeah, that was during the pandemic years, and vacuuming the living room. And now that he's back in the classroom, he is sometimes behind, and sometimes he feels like he isn't that smart. And this week, my son, Isaac, got some answers. He was diagnosed with an auditory processing disorder, and it turns out that he hears so well and listens so hard and intently that it is difficult for him to hear the voice of the teacher above the other voices in the classroom. Those of you who have hearing issues and wear those earphones that we have in the back may know what Isaac is dealing with, yes? He may have to use one of those assisted hearing devices in the classroom so that his teacher's teachings can be clearly heard above the noise, that an elementary school classroom is constantly purveying. Isaac is worried about being different a little bit, but the truth is we adults all have that same auditory processing disorder. It is difficult to hear the still small voice of our true teacher in the midst of the noise all around us. Isn't that right, adults? Isaac, you are not alone. Can you all say that? Isaac, you are not alone. We are a gullible people, easily taken in by the voices of advertising and Instagram influencers and self-help writers and TED Talks and podcasts and talk show hosts in Hollywood and snake oil salespeople and conspiracy theorists and politicians. And we are willing to believe anyone who uses a declarative voice that rises above all the noise, especially if it is a voice of certainty, because that capitalizes on all of our deepest fears, especially in uncertainty. We think that credentials, money, and power make someone inherently worthy of respect, so we often trust people we shouldn't, like politicians stoking culture wars to score points, or religious leaders who have harmed the vulnerable among us, or common criminal world leaders and corrupt CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Some of us gave up trying to listen for the true teacher long ago in favor of these other voices we'd rather listen to. We aren't still straining to hear like Isaac is. We have given up on wisdom in favor of easy truth, the kind that comes from people who think exactly like we already think and confirm all of our biases. The Lord has been revealed, the book of Isaiah says, to the one who is hated and rejected, to the person who bears our griefs and our infirmities. Wisdom doesn't come from books or degrees or money and power or status or the ability to harm one's opponents. Wisdom comes instead from empathy, the ability to put oneself in the shoes of another. It comes from service to the love that holds us all together. We often feel closest to God in the midst of our greatest suffering because when we are in pain and anguish and everything else falls away, that is when love shows up. And for that reason, we are so grateful to this diaconate that we bless today, these people of God who show up, who help us to bear our grieving and our illness. Surely they bear our griefs. Joyce, Clyde, Kate, and Paula, we are so grateful that you have chosen to serve the church in this way. We look to all of our deacons, not just to care for our members through maintaining public worship and giving heft and gravitas to our religious rituals, and giving care and love and pastoral visits, but also to help us discern the voice of wisdom in the decisions we make. When we first talked to Kate Potenza about potentially serving as a deacon, she was so confused. When Roy talked to her about service on the diaconate, he told her that deacons are the church elders. And Kate is not even 40. Are you 40? Close, almost 40, not 40 yet. So she is clearly not an elder, right? She wasn't sure whether to be offended or honored by being called an elder. She decided that she was flattered, but she didn't think she was qualified. And I explained to Kate that being an elder meant being a sage, a mature or venerable person of sound judgment. Kate may be young, but we know that she is profoundly wise. Though wisdom sometimes comes with age, it does not require us to be old. All wisdom really requires is the ability to listen without judgment, to put ourselves in each other's shoes, and the humility to not know everything we think we know. And Kate, you are so good at that. You are an elder. According to Will Gaffney, in biblical Hebrew, wisdom is as much technical expertise or craftsmanship as it is intellectual knowledge. In other words, we can learn how to be wise. We can practice wisdom like a craft, like an art. For the Israelites, the heart, not the head, was the source of thought and choice. If we want to become wise, we must practice asking questions, listening, and being fully present to our conversation partners. We must practice feeling our way into knowing. The Buddhists remind us that what we practice, we become. We can become wise. We can become elders. We can become sages. Practicing wisdom for Jesus meant breaking all the rules, to be among the people who were ordinary and despised and cast out, who worshiped in a different religion, who were very poor or very sick, or who made bad choices in the past. He touched them, he healed them, and he was despised and rejected himself, so he understood pain. He bore their pain and infirmity, so he was wise. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And nothing about Jesus gave him the credentials to say this. He wasn't a religious authority from Jerusalem. He wasn't a wise man from a distant land. He was a kid from Nazareth, born out of wedlock, who'd lived the first 30 years of his life as a carpenter in relative obscurity. He was a common laborer. He was not an academic or a politician or a celebrity. He had very few followers. He had no titles, no diplomas on the wall. His only credential was the validity of the words that came from his mouth and the actions that he had to back them up, illuminating the way of love for his followers. During Jesus' farewell speech that we read today before he is killed by execution by the Roman Empire, he lets his disciples know that he will prepare the way for them to follow, which is what all good sages do, mentors. He says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go and prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to me also, so that where I am, there you will be. And you know the way to the place where I am going, he says. In Bible study this week, we imagined together that the kingdom of heaven is just as Jesus describes, a place with more room. There is room for all in that place, a room for the Muslims and the Jews, and room for the Buddhists and for the Hindus, and for the Sikhs and the Baha'is, and there's room for the Baptists and the Congregationalists, and yes, the UUs, and the Episcopalians and the Mormons and the Seventh-day Adventists, and the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and the Catholics and the conservatives and the liberals, and there's room for gay and straight and white, black and brown and transgender and cisgender, and there's room for the poor and the divorced and the depressed and the oppressed and the able and the disabled bodies. There are no more fights in God's house about who is the most right and who is the most worthy, the one true church or the one true religion. In God's house, love is revealed to the ones who walk the path of suffering together. In God's house, there is room. There is room for all. And Jesus says to his disciples, you know this place, you know the way to this place where there is room, you know. And Thomas panics, right? He says, we do not know where you are going, Jesus. How can we know the way? He thinks he needs Google Maps directions, like a heavenly GPS system, right? To get to where he's going. And Jesus answers, you know the way because you know me. Love is the way. Love is the truth. Love is the life, he says. You already know the way. So, beloved, I know it's hard to hear the voice of the teacher above the noise of those who wish to distract us, but we can put on our assisted listening devices to hear the voice of God if we try. We can become elders, we can become sages, we can become bearers of grief and suffering. We already know the way because Jesus showed us. We know the way because we know Jesus. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor, love your enemy. We know the way because we know Jesus. Cast the mighty down from their thrones, proclaim freedom, and set the oppressed free. We know the way, beloved, because we know Jesus. Ask for forgiveness and forgive those who have wronged you. We know the way because we know Jesus. Break all of the rules to heal. We know the way because we know Jesus. Preach the gospel with your lives. If it is not good news to the poor, it's not good news. We know the way because we know Jesus. In God's house, there is room for all. Make room. We know the way because we know Jesus, and that means we can create heaven on earth right here if we make room for all. We know the way, beloved, because we know love. Amen.